Chairman, if I can, first of all, let's give a big round of applause for that meal here at the Kelly. Wasn't that fantastic? Thanks to the staff for helping us out, getting it cleaned up, and please finish up as we begin today's discussion. But I'd like to take a few minutes to introduce our key speaker today and dialogue forum. Representative Kevin Cramer was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives on November 6, 2012. He serves on the House Committee on Natural Resources and the Science, Space, and Technology Committee. Natural Resources Committee Chairman Doc Hastings appointed Kevin Cramer to a three-committee subcommittee, including Energy and Mineral Resources, Public Lands, and Environmental Regulation in Indian and Alaska Native Affairs. House Science, Space, and Technology Committee Chairman Lamar Smith has appointed Mr. Cramer to the Energy Subcommittee, where members will explore such science as hydraulic fracturing and clean coal technologies. In addition, Commissioner Cramer serves as Vice Chairman of the Subcommittee on Investigations and Oversight, which has general and special investigative authority on all matters within the jurisdiction of the full committee. A strong advocate for the free market system, Representative Cramer has a proven record of cutting and balancing budgets, encouraging the private sector through limited common sense regulations and limited government. With all due respect, please help me welcome Representative Kevin Cramer.
Maybe, does this mic work if I turn this on? And I can, there we go, that's more fun. Well, thank you all for being here and for your kind invitation to participate. First, I want to introduce my wife, Chris, who's really more responsible for me being here than anybody. One of the ways that Chris and I have helped place a hedge of protection around our family is that we've taken advantage of an opportunity in the ethics laws, the ethics rules of Congress, that say you can have one volunteer work for your official staff. So Chris is my state scheduler, and that means our family's well protected. I'm run like a dog, but the family's well protected. And then I have a couple of staffers here as well. My Deputy State Director, Larry Jonke, whose office is right here in Bismarck at the Federal Building. And then Chris Merrill is my Legislative Director. He's out here from Washington, D.C. During this time, we have a number of issues, of course, during this 5-week, they call it a recess. And I know we have a first grade son who started school today. We all delivered him, the entire family, taking pictures, to Shiloh School, and he's looking forward to recess too. But I'm pretty sure his is different. I'm pretty sure, from what I can tell. Anyway, and I introduced Chris and Larry not only so you know who they are, but to also let you know that one of the things I'm very proud of, and it's not just a matter of pride. It's also a matter of practicality. Is that I have a 100% North Dakota staff. That means the person that answers the phone in Washington or answers the phone in Fargo or wherever they may be is a North Dakotan, a native North Dakotan. In the case of Chris worked with me at the Public Service Commission. My chief of staff was our staff attorney at the Public Service Commission, Mark Guman, and I brought a lot of good people with me from North Dakota. And you need them. You need them. Because there's a lot of work to do, and I'm not satisfied with just going there to go there. And they have a great work ethic. They out-hustle just about everybody else that I've seen out there, and I'm very, very proud of them. And I always tell them we'll be judged by the product at the end of the day, not on the news release we put out today, but the product at the end of the day. So, with that, I want to. It's obviously. One thing about being a member of the People's House, and I love being a member of the People's House. I love being a member of the House of Representatives, because you're always up, aren't you? The next election is always close. And one of the things I love about it is I get to entertain a lot of North Dakotans. And being an at-large member, and I'd love to talk about that a little bit, because there are only 7 of us, 435 members of the House, 7 of us represent an entire state. The rest, represent a borough or a neighborhood or a peninsula or a few counties or a city. And there's a big difference. And so I get to entertain a lot of visitors. And one of my favorite things, of course, is when student groups come out. And the springtime is full of student groups. And I always try to get them to meet me on the Capitol steps if I can, if the weather permits. And by the way, the weather permitting is like 40 above or more for a North Dakotan. And so I get to do it a lot more often than my colleagues do. Can I take off a coat? Sure. And one of the questions that they often ask, and I hold little town halls, and one of the questions they often ask is, what do you think about term limits? Should there be term limits? And I always say to them, well, I said, first of all, I want you to think about, the men who started this country as you walk around this place. And as we sit here in the shadow of the ultimate symbol of our liberty, I want you to imagine that just on the other side of that door, right there, is the House of Representatives. And they're up for 2-year terms. And the House of Representatives was a great compromise, in the founding of this country, between having a Senate or a House. They decided to have both. So that half of the legislative authority rested with people who were always accountable to the ultimate source, the people. The people. And so while a term limit sounds like a good idea, remember that the only leverage you have as voters on a politician is your vote. And if that person never needs your vote again, you've lost your authority, your influence on that person. And I think that's one of the great things about the People's House. So when I look back here, we see the Democrats have a tracker here with a video camera. That's cool with me. I like that. Because it's an accountability structure, isn't it? Elections in a free society are a tool of accountability. Besides that, 2 years ago, I got to save an entire staff person because I didn't need anybody to video my speeches. I'd just go to their website and I'd link to their YouTube station. That's the great thing about our great democracy. So, well, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Let me say one other thing, and then what I really want to do is talk about what you want to talk about. I want to hear what you have to say, and then answer questions that you might have. It's an incredibly interesting time in Washington, having a divided government. Some people have complained that this is the least productive Congress in perhaps history of certainly recent times. To which I say, if you knew what they wanted to do to you, you should be grateful. How unproductive they are. Having said that, there's a lot of work to do. There are a lot of things to do, and there are a lot of things to undo. And I got to tell you, as one member of 435, being a freshman from what our favorite son Eric Severide once called the rectangular blank spot on the nation's mind, no longer the case. No longer the case. North Dakota is the rectangular stage underneath the nation's spotlight. And we have this incredible opportunity right now to highlight not just our ability to drill and recover oil and gas, to mine coal, to manufacture bobcats, right? We have this opportunity to demonstrate our entire culture, to show America how you become the state with the best economy in the world. The state that has some of the best values, the values that help create that economy, the work ethic that helps create that opportunity. And so we're showcasing it. And so now everybody's got a curiosity about it. We were just talking at the table a few weeks ago, actually a couple of months ago now, leadership came to me and said, the Energy and Commerce Committee wants to take a congressional delegation out to see North Dakota. Fred Upton is the chairman of the committee. Ed Whitfield is chairman of the subcommittee on energy. Lee Terry is a subcommittee chairman on commerce, and you probably know Lee pretty well. In fact, he asks about you from time to time. Kelvin. Lee's from Nebraska. Mike Pompeo from Kansas, who's got some very important energy legislation, was on that. Corey Gardner from Colorado, who has a similar economy to ours, except that a lot of his land is federally owned, where Barack Obama is the landlord as opposed to the guy that actually lives there. Anyway, Bill Thompson from Ohio, who's very familiar with coal mining, they were all part of this delegation. At their expense, they wanted to come and see North Dakota. And so we took them to the Bakken, and we kicked the tires and took some tours. Not for any reason other than they wanted to enhance their understanding and knowledge of this incredible thing happening out here in North Dakota, and how can we do better by it at the national level. We got back, and the next day I get a call from Eric Cantor's office saying, I want to come out there. Can we do it in August? I want to come and get there. Can I just come and see the Bakken? Got a call from Greg Walden, who's another Energy and Commerce Committee member, a former subcommittee chairman of the Telecommunications Committee. And he said, could I bring a delegation out there? I want to get a bunch of congressmen to come out and see the Bakken. Because these guys came back, and literally, you guys, they pull out their cell phones and say, look at this picture, look at this picture, look at this picture. This isn't a painting, this is real, you know? And that's what's happened. The world is watching us. And it's no longer just the Wall Street Journal and CNBC, but it's real people. So finally I said, listen, we're going to put a couple of these on for a while. I got to do some things too, you know. It's not all about you. It's about our constituents too. So it's a great honor, you guys. It's such a privilege to be able to serve you, and my work every day is really about you. It's about representing this best place in the country. I realize I'm a little biased, but it's not about any politician. No politician invented the Bakken. No politician invented the coal. No politician invented the topsoil, you know. No politician invented the work ethic. Now, I'm an old regulator, you probably knew that. These guys know. One thing I learned being a government regulator is there's darn little I can do to improve an economy, but there's a lot I can do to screw it up. And when you trust the natural order of things, the free market of things, referee occasionally if a fight breaks out, you know, things go pretty well. That's the advantage of the North Dakota culture, is that landowners and corporate citizens and local communities and mayors and county commissions and school boards working together works really quite well. Occasionally, somebody has to, arbitrate. As opposed to the way it's going now in the federal government, where there's this barrage of federal regulation, absolutely arbitrary, in some cases literally ignoring the Constitution and laws, and it's stifling our economy. And people wonder, why aren't we having this breakout in the economy? Why is this recovery so difficult? This is why. Because the government is imposing itself where it ought not. So we have a great story to tell and a great contribution to make to our country, and I'm honored to sort of be able to carry that North Dakota banner for you all in Washington. With that, let's turn it over to Regis Philman, and he'll come up here and we'll do a little. Is that fair? And then we're going to talk about what you all want to talk about.
I think my wife only wishes I were Regis.
She wants to be. No, never mind.
Oh, first of all, Congressman, thank you for being here today, and we're very interested to obviously see what the members have to talk about. But just to kind of get things started while they're thinking through a couple of their ideas, let's talk a bit more about energy, an issue that I know that you're very well versed on. As you said, you were a former regulator, and as we look at our future, not just in North Dakota but in America, energy is obviously going to play a vital role, as everything is dependent on energy and the cost of energy. There's a lot of discussion about the coal industry and what's going to happen with some, particularly 2 EPA regs that are in process now, and how that's going to impact the cost of electricity in not just the Midwest but across America. Talk just a bit about where you see regulation of the coal industry going and how you think that will impact constituents.
Sure. Well, obviously the coal industry has been a highly regulated industry for a long time, and it's not just the regulations but the regulators that matter, because there aren't a lot of new regulations per se. There are no new laws in recent years, really, but the way with which they're carried out, the zeal with which they're carried out in some cases makes a big difference. And the problem with a divided government like we have now, where we have let's face it, we know how our president feels about coal. He campaigned that he was going to bankrupt the industry. He campaigned on the idea that it was necessary for there to be a sharp increase in electricity prices. And he's living up to that promise by the people he appoints. It's interesting. Well, to get to specifically, now one of the issues, for example, and these guys know I may be the last one standing on some of these, but the coal ash, for example, regulation. Coal ash is one of those things that we're very familiar with in North Dakota because we use it. We use it to strengthen our cement and concrete and several other products like shingles, and it's used in lots of ways. It's a byproduct that's marketable in the marketplace. And the reason we're able to do that with coal ash, fly ash, as opposed to put it into a landfill, which you can also do with it, is because when power generation with coal first started a long time ago, there was a president named Jimmy Carter whose EPA thought we better look into this coal ash thing and try to determine whether this is a hazardous waste or not. God knows we don't want to be flippant with hazardous waste. So they began the discovery process with science and concluded nothing, but certainly determined that we can't conclude that it's hazardous. And then along came a few more presidents, and every EPA kept studying this issue until finally, when President Bill Clinton was president, the EPA came with a determination that was final. Not only do we not conclude it's hazardous, we have concluded definitively and scientifically that coal ash is a non-hazardous waste. And along comes a new president, a couple presidents later, in Barack Obama, who decided one day, let's make it hazardous. And so now what we find ourselves doing is preparing for the final rule. It's going to be devastating in many respects, because what happens is, if it's hazardous, remember, if it's hazardous, it has to be treated very differently. What I love telling people in Washington about our use of coal ash is that coal ash, we actually put it in the concrete to shore up the foundations for wind turbines. How's that for good conservation? And so it's just one little way, and one little. But here's my concern. There's a bill that came out that I signed off on that tries to sort of mitigate some of this stuff, but it assumes but the bill assumes it's hazardous, and to me that's giving up too easily. So as a member of the science committee, I'm calling for a oversight hearing where I'm vice chairman on the EPA's conclusion that it's hazardous. Do you know that the EPA has made rulings in recent years where we have, as a committee, as an oversight jurisdiction, have asked for the data regarding Clean Air Act for over 20 years, and they've never sent us the data. They stonewall and stonewall and stonewall and stonewall and stonewall. And now, of course, we have a very hostile EPA because we have a hostile president. And so we took a big step just before coming back and have ordered them, we've empowered the chairman to subpoena the records that they have not been willing to give to us. It's a very sad day when Congress has to subpoena its own the administration of the country to get records that should be readily available to members of Congress. And so I'm not ready. I don't like these kinds of compromises when there's science that proves that it is non-hazardous. To assume it's hazardous as a tool to try to find a compromise, you're on the slippery slope. So that's just one. And there are a whole bunch of others as well, but I'm in the right committees, I can tell you that.
Yeah, you are. In fact, one of my more recent favorite things I've seen is the change in the cost of the price of the social cost of carbon that was buried in the microwave standard on page 400 in appendix 14A. Yeah. That made a lot of sense. Yeah. Questions from the audience that you would have? Let's talk just a bit more about energy. Obviously, hydraulic fracturing is made North Dakota's economy, as I say, supercharged. We were doing well before, but oil has compelled us up to the next level. But as we look around the country, and particularly in places, New York, Pennsylvania, some of those other locations where they're talking about fracking, even I see now in England, there's a big controversy over their very first fracking opportunity.
There's a lot of discussion, a lot of debate about how fracking gets regulated, and how do you see it playing into the future of our energy resources?
Well, here's a place where, again, Congress's role of oversight is really important during this administration, because this administration is clearly going down a path to regulation. And the fracking rule, there are two things. One is there's the fracking rule that BLM is considering, and they've written rules for it and modified them over time, and I'll talk about that specifically. And then there's this study that's been going on by the EPA of fracking's impact on groundwater. And of course we know it's never had any. And they use as the basis the situation in Wyoming that was proven to not be true at all, but yet they continue to use it as the basis for continuing to, quote, study it. And here's the problem, you guys. The problem with an EPA that doesn't ever have to conclude anything is that all they have to do is keep investigating it to create the same impact. Because when there's uncertainty, as you know, if you're in the investment community, you have to assume the worst case scenario. The problem then becomes when business and industry itself says, yeah, but at least give us certainty in the rules. We can't fight this anymore. Just give us the rules and we'll deal with that certainty. And obviously be careful. Because the certainty that they aspire to is your worst case scenario. That is, so some things are worth fighting for. So to the fracking rule, and I've been in hearings on both of these, one in Science Committee, one in the Natural Resources Committee. I oppose the rule altogether. And I know there's already this move to sort of compromise. And here's why and I just did an interview with Platts the other day on this, because they find my rigidity on this sort of, they want to understand it. And I said, well, you were at the last hearing. Platts covers our hearings quite closely. And I said, remember when the gentleman from California said, look, maybe your constituents in Wyoming and yours in Montana and yours in North Dakota don't want a minimum standard. Maybe they don't. But my constituents in California do. So we should have one. And I said, well, congratulations, because your constituents in California do have a minimum standard. We're just offended by the fact you want to impose that minimum standard on us, because we have excellent standards. Don't impose your mediocrity on our excellence. If Montana or California wants to have a minimum standard that leads to high unemployment and leads to out-migration and leads to a bad economy and high electricity prices and high gasoline prices, you got it. Now, I'd love to build a pipeline to help you out, but if you don't want one, that's up to you. But we don't. So for now, Kelvin, we have to continue to fight it with all we can, and then hope, for a better result in the next election.
I think that's an excellent answer. And on the issue of natural resources, let's talk about water for a minute. Whiskey's for drinking, water's for fighting.
Yeah.
And we've had a lot of discussion about the water resources in North Dakota, but I think one that has really come to the forefront, and last week when Senator Hoban was here, he talked about, was the whole discussion about the Corps of Engineers and their regulation, and the discussion about should North Dakota actually have to pay to access the water in the Missouri River system, which obviously is something that we're not very much in favor of. What's your read on kind of where that discussion is going and the water issue nationally?
Yeah. Well, first of all, specifically to that issue, the issue of water storage fees, which is that's how they charge you for your own water. I would go back to the Constitution, which states that a river is the states that it's passing through. And a reservoir is just a widening of that same river. I believe that. Of course, I believed, Kelvin, a couple of years ago, when we were sending public officials to Corps of Engineers hearings, we had it reversed. We should have been inviting them to ours. I don't know why we should have to sue, if you will, or take litigation against our federal government to keep what is rightfully ours. They ought to have to come after us to get what is rightfully ours if they want it. Now, that's sort of tough talk, but I think it's time for somebody to stand up to that. That said, one of the things I've learned rather quickly, and I think some of it's because I've been around while I'm a freshman in Congress, I've been around politics a while, I was able to get an amendment, Christy Noem of South Dakota and I co-introduced an amendment to the water, or to the Authorization Act, and the Energy and Water Authorization Act. And what we did was, we put an amendment in there that prohibits them from charging storage water, and it passed. The Democrats opposed it on the floor, but they didn't vote against it. So it passed. We did the same with the Energy and Water appropriations bill, or when WORDA comes up, we're gonna do it again. We're just gonna keep adding it to everything we can. You know, Senator Hogan got the same amendment passed in their appropriations bill. And so we'll just keep at it that way. It's unfortunate you have to do that, but it is clear that the will of the Congress is with us. And that's, so regardless of what the administration wants to do, even if we never get to reconciliation on some of these things, both chambers of Congress have voted decisively on this topic.
Questions from out in the audience? Mr. Straley.
Something near and dear to my heart, and maybe probably the biggest oxymoron. The Affordable Care Act. Can you give us a perspective on where that's heading? And I can see right around this room, I mean, I don't know who I would approach in here that would say, can you tell me what your regulations are going to be for the future as a business? Small business owner, large business owner, businesses that do cross-state line business, insurance companies, so on and so forth. I mean, that's a business community, that's a big part of Bismarck, Mandan, is the insurance piece of it, as well as for all of us as employers, how we're going to provide that. Give your perspective on what's happening in DC and where you see that next.
Sure. Several things. First of all, obviously, the president's delaying the employer mandate by a year is a pretty clear signal that they're not ready. And we've known that for a long time. In fact, we have really, as a chamber, we expected the president to come and seek our permission to delay implementation of Obamacare for a year. We were prepared to do that, and we were prepared to answer him. What we didn't anticipate was that he would ignore us altogether and just say, I'm not going to enforce the law, therefore it's delayed by a year. You can argue whether that's legal or illegal or impeachable or non-constitutional. If he was changing the regulation, it would clearly be not proper and not legal probably, but all he's really done is done what lots of presidents have done about lots of laws, and that is say to the people who work for him, don't enforce that one for another year. The problem is when the year is up, the law is still the law. And everything you did in that year with his promise can be held against you a year later. So what we did then is, as a house, we thought we better help this poor guy out. And so we introduced and passed a law to codify his own actions. Thinking, how could Harry Reid and Barack Obama oppose a law that's just going to codify what he's decided to do? And we passed a law that delays implementation of the mandate by a year and got 35 Democrats to join all 234 Republicans in that vote. The same day we introduced and passed another bill with 22 Democrats joining every Republican. That is to delay the individual mandate by a year as well. Because it's hardly fair. All those things, like I said, all these same responsibilities are in place, and they're certainly going to be in place for the individual. And the IRS, as we know, they do such a great job of watching us all. They're the ones that are going to be policing this whole thing. They're not going to let you off the hook, even if they let your company off the hook. And so we just thought, that's only fair. How could they oppose that? But of course, so far, the Senate hasn't taken it up. Where do I see it heading? I think one of the things that a lot of times has been lost is there's been a two-track, really parallel track attack on this, if you will, by those in the Republican side, none of whom ever voted for Obamacare. Not a single Republican vote was cast in the House of Representatives for Obamacare. Is that consistent votes to completely repeal it, or to defund the IRS portion of implementation, or even just deauthorize the IRS portion. We had about 40 votes to do that. Many of them before I got there, 3 of them since I've been there. To these other little things, and the interesting thing is we forget about the little things, but there have been 7 bills passed by the Congress, signed by the President, that repealed portions of the Affordable Care Act. And what's interesting is I remember during the campaign in the debates, everyone would get up, certain people would get up and say, oh, I'm against this tax, I'm against that tax, I'm against that tax, I'm against that penalty, but we need to do this and this and this and this. They're against everything that would pay for all the things they want to do over here. And I say, this isn't quite as simple as all of that. So little by little, I think things are happening, but what we're really seeing happen, Dave, is you're starting to see momentum build in opposition to it. And those 35 Democrats and 22 Democrats in the House that voted with Republicans are the first crack in this dam. Because, like I said, it's the people's house. And the benefit of having an election no further out than 2 years from the day you're elected is that you have to always be accountable. And so that's forced a lot of people to rethink this whole thing. There are 52 Democrats right now that have formed a coalition and that are very concerned. And so what I worry about a little bit is going right into the fall. We're coming up on first of all, the end of the budget year, right? So it's at the end of September, we have to either do a continuing resolution or pass a whole bunch of appropriations bills fast. The House has passed 4, and I think maybe the Senate's passed 1, I'm not sure. And there has to be 12. But more likely there'll be a debate about the continuing resolution. There's a very loud clamor to use that as a lever to completely defund Obamacare. I think that's treacherous, but it's worth considering. But shortly after that, of course, we're going to come up on the debt ceiling, an area where we have perhaps a little more leverage. And so I think you're going to see is in these next 2 big votes, debt ceiling and the continuing resolution, you're going to start seeing a lot of issues come into play and being used in and out and use this leverage one way or another. The challenge, I think, is that I would say is that let's be careful to not, shoot too high. Because one thing about it, you can aim really, really high and never get there. Or you can work and get halfway there on your way to there. And sometimes perfect has become the enemy of good in Congress. I see that a lot. That's one of my greatest frustrations if you ask me a question about that.
Oh, back here.
Would you comment on the exemptions that are given out, especially in Washington and certain corporations?
Yeah, sure. Well, sure. I mean, the first exemptions that were given out by the president were to certain corporations that just happened to be supporters, certain groups and organizations. The second one which happened really just as we were leaving town before the recess, and the administration wants to exempt. And I think what's happened is that they're hearing a lot from Harry Reid and Nancy Pelosi, and he's hearing a lot from his own employees. One thing about Washington, you guys, is that it's, as you probably know, if you've ever been there, it's largely run by young, single, professional people, somewhere in the range of 25 to 35 years old, right? There's a whole bunch of those. Guess who gets hit hardest by Obamacare? Young, healthy people, especially single people. I mean, they're the group whose premiums go way, way up, because that's the group of healthy people that they need to be paying premiums to pay for the whole program. And so what happened, I think, is all these Democrats that loved Obamacare were hearing from some of the people that helped them write it because they know so much about life.